ایران، هسته‌ای، تهدیدهای تروریستی و نقض حقوق بشر پس از تعامل و تحریم‌ها. واشنگتن، اقدام اجرایی 20 ژانویه 2011.
A panel of former top government officials discuss U.S. security issues concerning Iran. We'll hear from former CIA Director James Woolsey, former FBI Director Louis Freeh, and former Homeland Security Secretary Tom Ridge, plus former National Security Advisor to President Obama, General James Jones. They talk about the Iranian group MEK, which advocates the overthrow of the Iranian government. A number of members of Congress have asked the Obama administration to take MEK off the State Department's terrorist list. Hosted by Executive Action, this is 2 hours and 45 minutes.
CEO of Executive Action, which is sponsoring this event. I'd like to welcome you all today, especially the distinguished speakers, to the second conference that Executive Action has organized in as many months. As you know, the Iranian regime continues to pose the greatest strategic threat to peace and security in the region and the world by virtue of its relentless pursuit of nuclear weapons and its export of terrorism around the world. Therefore, we need to explore U.S. policies toward Iran. The nuclear clock is ticking much faster than the pace of sanctions, so the United States must do more. It must do it faster, and it must do it better. And with that thought, I want to turn the microphone over to Senator Robert Torisly, who accepted our invitation to moderate this very important and nonpartisan event today. And he will moderate this event this morning. Bob?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that warm welcome and for this opportunity this morning. Winston Churchill, who once noted that the United States can usually be counted upon to do the right thing after it has exhausted all other options. Soon, the international community will meet again with the government of Tehran to discuss its nuclear weapons program. All options have been tried. And once again, there will be an attempt to convince, using all forces of reason, that it comply with international law, common sense, and its own interests, and abandon this folly. I have my own hopes for today's discussion, though each speaker will pursue their own interest and observations as they see fit. My first would be, it is time to start debating the reality of the situation. An outlaw regime, hell-bent on weapons of mass destruction, that is a threat not only to the Western world, but a direct threat to all of its neighbors, of all faiths and all backgrounds. It was perhaps said best by President Bush when he made it clear that a nuclear-armed Iran is simply unacceptable under any terms. It is one thing for us to say it. It is another to devise a policy that will achieve it. Economic sanctions in a world that thirsts for oil, in Iran which produces billions of dollars, is unlikely to be a coercive policy. Reason and logic and the force of international law used against a regime which has murdered millions of its own, thousands of its own people, enslaved millions in a dictatorship, and violated all forms of international behavior, is simply not a realistic policy. What of our policy with opponents of the regime who share the Iranian identity? Does it make sense? Does it have benefit that we continue to ostracize, label opponents of the regime as terrorists when the facts say otherwise? Do we gain anything for political purposes of making these identities when we know it has no policy benefit and undermines the legitimacy of the opposition? Indeed, let me pose this question. Is it even possible to oppose a terrorist state and be a terrorist yourself? Is it possible to be identified as a terrorist if you are unarmed and for most of the last decade under the protection of the United States Army? It is time to deal with reality. We are not going to convince the Iranians to change policy, and undermining the credibility of their opponents is only doing service to the very people that we choose to oppose. With that, let us begin our discussion. For our first speaker today, it is my great privilege to introduce the 81st Attorney General of the United States,